Right now, somewhere, a mother is being congratulated for having twins. Double the cake, double the photos, double the joy, everyone says. But for most of human history, that same birth was not a celebration. In some villages, it was a death sentence. Not for the mother, for the babies. You'd expect fear like that to come from ignorance, from a village that simply didn't know any better. It's more unsettling than that. The people doing this often understood their situation with brutal clarity. What was driving it wasn't ignorance at all. It was math. For nearly all of human history, a mother's body could reliably feed one infant at a time. Walking for miles with a baby on your hip was survivable. Walking with two was not. So when a woman gave birth to twins, some communities did not see a blessing. They saw a threat to the group's food, a threat to the mother's life, and sometimes something stranger than either of those. They saw an omen. Anthropologists who studied twin beliefs across dozens of small-scale societies found the same pattern showing up again and again on different continents among people who had never met each other. A single birth was human. A double birth was not. If one body produced two children at once, something other than a normal father must be involved. Some communities quietly assumed the mother had been with two men, or worse, with something that wasn't a man at all. The twins weren't punished for what they did. They were punished for what their birth seemed to prove. This is where the story gets uncomfortable, because it's true. In several documented West African communities in the 19th century, twin births were treated as a curse on the whole village, not just the family. The Scottish missionary Mary Slessor, working in the Calabar region of what is now Nigeria in the 1880s, recorded case after case of exactly this pattern. A mother giving birth, village elders arriving within hours, and the infants carried into the forest before the mother had even finished recovering from labor. Slessor personally intervened dozens of times over her decades in the region, sometimes walking into the bush herself to retrieve an abandoned infant, sometimes taking in a rejected mother who had nowhere else left to go. This isn't folklore. It's colonial-era missionary record, corroborated by later ethnographic work in the same region. Here's the part that should stop you. The very cultures that feared twins the most were often the cultures where twins were born the most. West Africa has, and had, the highest natural twinning rate on Earth. Some Yoruba communities recorded twin births at roughly 1 in every 20 to 30 pregnancies, compared to about 1 in 80 worldwide. The people most likely to fear the unnatural birth were also, biologically, the people most likely to experience it. Nobody in these communities had a word for the actual cause. Modern researchers have proposed one leading hypothesis: a diet heavy in a specific type of yam common across the region, containing a compound that may act somewhat like estrogen in the body, potentially triggering the release of more than one egg per cycle. If that hypothesis holds, the very food keeping these communities fed may have also been quietly increasing the odds of the exact birth they feared most. Nature accidentally manufacturing more of the omen in the regions most primed to be terrified of it. You'd think that would make twins ordinary there. Familiar, explainable. Instead, in some neighboring communities, it made them more terrifying, not less. A rare event can be dismissed as a fluke. A recurring one starts to look like a pattern the world is trying to tell you about. But here's the twist that anthropologists find genuinely strange. Travel a short distance from the villages that feared twins into other Yoruba communities in the same region, and you'd find the opposite reaction entirely. Twins weren't killed there. They were worshipped. Small carved figures called IBG were made to represent a twin who died in infancy, dressed, fed, and cared for as if the child were still alive, sometimes for decades. Same biology, same twinning rate, same continent. Completely different meaning assigned to the exact same event. West Africa isn't the only place this pattern shows up, either. Among some East African pastoralist communities, twin births were historically treated with similar suspicion, sometimes requiring elaborate purification rituals before the family could be reintegrated into normal village life. Among certain indigenous groups in parts of North America, twins were treated not as a curse, but as evidence of special spiritual power, occasionally raised with distinct ceremonial roles the rest of the community didn't share. Different continents, different explanations, but the same underlying instinct. An event that breaks the expected one-birth pattern gets a story built around it almost immediately. And which story gets told seems to depend far more on a community's existing beliefs than on anything about the twins themselves. When anthropologists see the same underlying instinct show up this consistently in societies with no contact and no shared language, they don't usually chalk it up to coincidence. They treat it as evidence of a shared cognitive tendency. Humans across cultures appear wired to demand an explanation for anything that breaks an expected biological pattern, and in the absence of a scientific one, a spiritual or moral explanation reliably fills the gap instead. The explanation changes by region. The demand for one doesn't. That's the part worth sitting with. The fear was never really about the babies. It was about the story a community had already decided to tell about anything that broke the pattern of one mother, one child. Where the story was, this is a curse, people acted on that story, sometimes violently. Where the story was, this is a gift from the spirit world, people built shrines instead. The evolutionary anthropologist Sarah Blaffer-Hrdy has spent decades studying why human mothers, across cultures, sometimes make devastating decisions about which infants survive. Her research points to something colder than superstition: resource math. A mother with barely enough support to raise one infant, facing two at once, was in some communities making a triage decision disguised as a spiritual one. The taboo wasn't the cause. It was the cover story that made an unbearable decision feel like it came from outside the family, from fate, rather than from the mother herself. The numbers back up why that cover story mattered so much. Researchers studying parental investment, including the foundational work of Martin Daly and Margot Wilson, found that infanticide risk across many species, including humans, rises sharply whenever a parent's ability to raise offspring is suddenly cut in half. Twins don't just double the joy. Historically, they doubled the demand on a body and a food supply that was often already stretched to its limit, and some researchers estimate that in resource-scarce foraging societies, a mother nursing twins without outside support faced a measurably higher risk of losing one or both children to malnutrition than a mother nursing a single infant. So the fear wasn't really superstition dressed up as biology. It was biology, dressed up as superstition, because superstition was easier to live with than the truth. Not every twin-fearing culture acted on it the same way, either. Some communities didn't kill twins outright. They separated them, giving one child to a relative in another village, so no single household had to carry the full weight of two infants at once. The receiving family absorbed one extra mouth to feed, spread across an entire kinship network instead of concentrated onto one exhausted mother, and the arrangement could last a season or a lifetime depending on how quickly the birth family's circumstances improved. Quietly, without ever naming it, some of these cultures had invented a form of adoption, centuries before the word existed, as a workaround for a fear they couldn't fully explain but a math problem they understood perfectly. Which raises the question, why does this feel so foreign to you now? Because the constraint that created the fear is mostly gone. You live in a world with formula, with hospitals, with grandparents who can fly in on a plane, with strangers on the internet who will mail you a box of diapers if you ask. The math that once made twins terrifying has been solved by everything modern life quietly provides. The fear didn't disappear because people became less superstitious. It disappeared because the resource problem underneath the superstition disappeared first. But look closer at how you react to anything that breaks an expected pattern, and the old instinct is still there, just wearing new clothes. A neighbor with an unusual number of pets. A coworker whose life doesn't follow the expected timeline. A birth announcement that isn't the version people expected. You don't call it a curse. You call it a lot. You still feel the tug to explain the unusual event with a story before you've actually looked at what caused it. Someone has twins after a round of fertility treatment, and a stranger will still ask, without a hint of irony, whether it runs in the family. Reaching for a story about fate or destiny before reaching for the far less romantic explanation sitting in the medical chart the whole time. The instinct to reach for meaning before you reach for math is still fully intact in you. It just has better manners now. Somewhere, right now, a mother is still being congratulated for having twins. Double the cake, double the joy, everyone says. But you now know what her ancestors would have felt walking out of that same delivery room. Not joy, calculation. And the difference between their fear and your celebration was never really about the babies at all. It was about who had already solved the math long before the twins arrived.